So Todd and I were just sitting here talking about some baits, and we're talking about some jerk baits and some different stuff, and we're talking about some under the radar baits, and we kind of wanted to share with y'all our favorite under the radar baits for tournament fishing. Both Todd and I tournament fish a lot, whether it's local stuff or opens or whatever. But there are a couple baits that I feel like are kind of sliding under that radar just a little bit, and we both have them. I know you probably have some, so make sure you comment those below. What is your most under the radar bait that you fish with in tournaments that just you don't feel like people are picking up as much anymore? Todd, what you got?
What's funny is, and just a background, like people don't even realize we have these conversations about different things all the time. And what's funny is it's kind of like the backside of the story. We really were talking about kind of the newer baits, and we always trying to like determine the future, right? Like what's going to happen in the future. And then what usually happens is the future starts going one way, but then the past brings back up these baits that still win, and like it'll make these baits even better. And that's where I'm going with my three, because my
Yeah.
three are going to be very basic, but I have a reason behind it. So you want me to start with
Yeah,
mine?
go start with yours. But I agree with you. I mean, like that's kind of where I'm at. Like there's some things, there's new baits that are great that
Yes.
people just are sleeping on, and then there's old school baits that people still are sleeping on that maybe were good at one point.
This is the best one. This is the dumbest, but I have to give you the reason why. So the spinnerbait.
God, really?
Yeah, for tournament fishing. And here's why. Like I know that's gonna sound so ridiculous to
But
some, but
it's
here's
not
what.
because that was my number one as well.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's dead serious. Dead
So
serious.
so when I fished so where I live right here is the spinnerbait was probably one of the best baits for years. And now like we all laugh about it because like you can't hardly catch a fish where we live on a spinnerbait. Like everything has to be perfect. Like in a bad way, like has to be nasty weather, all
Yeah.
these different things. And so I stopped throwing a spinnerbait for years. Now there was a couple dirty, nasty lakes you could still throw it on, but like just don't throw it around. No one throws a spinnerbait that much for tournament fishing, right? Well, man, my first year on tour, we went to Okeechobee.
Hmm.
So that was like 4 years ago. And we went to Okeechobee and then Harris Chain. Anyways, and then we went to Cumberland. You
Oh
remember when the
yeah.
spinner?
God, it was
So
so
like I
fun.
looked up that year, and for a guy who grew up throwing a spinnerbait my whole life, and then went like 10 years and like caught less than 50 fish on it in 10 years, because it just that tour, I made checks on like 4 out of the 7 events that year, and a spinnerbait was like probably I caught more fish on that year than anything.
Yeah.
And but it was weird how I was like, I go all over the country and I'll catch them. I just can't catch them back home on it. But I mean, it get everyone, all these new things come around. And when everything's right, dude, you can't beat the spinnerbait.
No.
And I think it's like people forget about it.
Well, I mean, and to your point, so my number one was also spinnerbait,
That's
which
crazy.
is hilarious. But and we
And
didn't even
guys,
plan this. Yeah,
we
this
don't,
was like literally
yeah.
like I made him pick his three, I picked my three, and we kept him quiet, and we just kind of went with it. The reason I think spinnerbait is a lot of people are throwing vibrating jigs, chatterbaits, thunder
Yep.
crickets, those kind of things, and they're throwing a lot of swim jigs. And it's almost like the swim jig chatterbait replaced the spinnerbait in a lot of people's hands. And now you pick it up, it's kind of taboo almost. It's like, oh, you're throwing a spinnerbait? What are you throwing a spinnerbait for? But the thing is the spinnerbait still catches giants. Like it absolutely still catches giants. Actually, Strike King just released the new tour grade spinnerbait, and it's got a thinner wire, it's got the right hook, it's got good hand tied skirts, it's got a lot of the right features. And I've been really messing with them a lot lately and changing some blades out, putting some different blade combinations. Because that's the cool thing about spinnerbaits that I feel like I know I did as a kid. I had my own like spinnerbait box. I had component boxes with like extra blades and all these different things. And I'd build my own spinnerbaits. I'd cut wires and bend them and do all this stuff. And that's the thing I feel like a lot of people don't do like they used to. Chris McCall is a big example of that. Like he 100% builds every spinnerbait he makes before he goes to a tournament. Like he doesn't just go buy one off the shelf. Like he modifies it exactly what he wants all the time. And I think that's a really a kind of a lost art almost is really making those spinner baits work for you. So let's jump into number 2, Todd. What do you got for number 2? If you say what I think you're going to say, I'm going to be
No, because you kind of, so I think this one, so this was like, in my opinion, the next evolution of the spinnerbait. And then I think it's slowly being replaced as well. And you said it, but I think it's gone under is the swim jig.
Yeah.
And the reason I say the swim jig is I think people are throwing it, but they're throwing it more like the old school or like the new school swim jig, like the chatterbait. And I was probably throwing a swim jig. I think if you remember, like I was throwing a swim jig back in the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
I had figured it out on Rayburn to throw it over the, like submerged under the grass when it was throwing like rattle traps and stuff. And it was like no one had ever, it was always like kind of the on top of the water type deal visually. Yeah. And it seems like that's what it progressed into that. And then the chatterbaits come along, you know, and that's replaced that. But man, the old school way of throwing a swim jig up on top, I think over the past couple of years, I have made more money doing that than anything.
Yeah.
And it's just
it's a good bait. I mean, and it is underfished. Like,
because
I sit there and talk about it being fished a lot. And in certain situations, like it's heavily fished.
Yes.
You go to Florida and everybody has a swim jig on their deck. But you go to,
they have a chatterbait.
Well, they do.
And then anywhere else they'll have a frog if it's on top of the water. So right. Like they're not, they've replaced it with how it was the swim jig was really, correct me if I'm wrong, it was really made popular by fishing it on top of the water.
It was. No, I agree completely.
And I think that's
and there was actually 2 ways. Like, so the 2 ways were the guys that were like in the Mississippi River area. The only way they fished a swim jig was with lighter line, like 12 to 15 pound test, swimming it down, kind of like what we do.
Tom Mansour.
The Tom Mansour, the lighter rod, that kind of deal. And then you had the high swim jig guys, the ones that kept it right on the surface and popped it and did all that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, absolutely. And then when everybody kind of went down to the fishing it down in the water with a bigger one, you know, they kind of forgot. I feel like people, we overthink things so much. I mean, as fishermen, we talked about that yesterday. We had a long conversation about guys just overthinking things. But so my number 2 is probably the most basic bait that there is a Texas rig worm, Texas rig anything. And the problem is everybody will pick up either weightless or like for instance, you know, picking up a Nico rig, picking up a drop shot, picking up a shake it. We have all these options to pick up, but at the end of the day, a Texas rig is still one of the most deadly techniques that there is. And now, and I'm saying for tournament guys, and I know that you can go out on Toledo Bend right now. Well, maybe not right now because it's freezing cold. But say 2 days ago when it was like 70 degrees, you could go out there and you could have gone up to Blue Lake and there's 50,000 boats up there right now, and 3/4 of them are throwing a Texas rig. And I'm not saying people don't throw Texas rigs, so please understand that.
We're talking tournament fishermen.
Yep. And I'm not talking flipping. I'm not talking flipping bushes and having a Texas rig. I'm saying the old school method of taking a Texas rig, unpegged, and casting out there and fishing it slow back to the boat. Guys don't do it anymore. Larry Nixon made his almost entire career doing that. You know, and still to this day, he hasn't been to Toledo and probably since the last tournament they had here. And every single time he shows up here, he smokes on them, and he smokes on them throwing Texas rig. That's just a fact.
And so what I'm going to talk about what Andrew, I'm going to piggyback on that and say, because there's going to be guys that don't understand what that means. We will all throw a Texas rig where it makes sense, right? Like, so we'll throw one in a brush pile, right? Yep. We'll throw one on and we'll flip it, or maybe we'll drag around out there deep. But like, no one's going down a causeway. No one's throwing in scattered grass. No one's throwing around groups of stumps and casting it out there in shallow water and dragging around. Like, people are going to throw a jig. They're going to throw, like, I agree with you. There's all these other options. And then I'll look up and I'll see some old man out there just dragging a Texas rig lizard around right now, catching an 8-pounder. And I'm just going, oh yeah, that still works.
Oh yeah. No, and that's what's crazy is like, my favorite bait right now when and I'm talking we're in the last week of February, first week of March, that time frame is a Texas rig, no questions asked. And the reason is because these fish are starting to funnel in these places. I know we had a cold front come in today or last night and it's cold, but the next couple days it'll just gradually start warming back up and those fish has already started funneling in. I mean, if you looked at the Bass Pro Tour event at Lake Fork, you saw that. You've seen these guys really start targeting these fish that are moving in these spawning flats. And I know that they're already starting here on Toledo as well. So, like, there's a lot of opportunity there to go out there and throw a Texas rig right now and catch some fish. It's just a unique way to catch them that I feel like we kind of slept on for a little while. So, take you a lizard, take you a game hog, take you a straight tail worm, like a finesse worm, and you'll catch some fish right now on it, no questions asked. Like, it's really good. So, Todd, what is your number three? Your last but not least under the
It's
radar bait.
it's the secondary version of what you just said. It's the Carolina rig.
Yeah.
And down here where we live, it's such a staple. But I remember fishing when I go to all these other lakes all over the country, right? And y'all are used to it, right? And you'll be like, "Hey, Todd, you get any bite?" I'm like, "Hey, caught him on a Carolina rig. Got some bites on the rig today." I remember going to Hartwell, and I didn't have live scope. Y'all were all live scoping, and so I was like, "How would I normally just fish these points?" Right? I'd bust out a Carolina rig, and I'm like, "Oh, here's the easy way to catch a limit." I just went to every single little point and got bit on like 70% of them. They weren't giants, but I was just trying to catch a limit. And man, I go to Cumberland and smallmouth. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. And so for a lot of you guys that don't have live scope, and I bring up live scope because it's everyone has this idea of what we think's going on or going to happen, and this is the only way to catch a fish, right? Like we forget the basics. If you get those guys as co-anglers, and this is why I know, and those guys, like, they'll drop shot, they'll do all these things, and you get that guy with the right Carolina rig, right? And he bombs it out there, 100 yards, way out of live scope range, way out of all that stuff, and they just cover water with it, and they get bit. And I do the same thing. I do the same thing. I don't have to be in the back of the boat to do it. I do the same thing. You're throwing out there further than anyone else can throw. The fish aren't scared of your boat. All these different things, and it catches fish in 2 foot of water and 50 foot of water. Like, it does not matter. And it catches giants. And you rarely see guys. I guess maybe it has a bad rap around the country as being I don't know. It doesn't around where we live. It's like,
No, it's we talk about, actually Todd and I were mentioning about certain baits being on people's deck. Like if you look at one of the biggest team trails here, Bass Champs, if you went and looked at on everybody's deck on Rayburn, like if they fished a tournament today, almost every single deck would have a Carolina rig on.
it should.
You
It
know,
better.
and that, but I mean, that's what you deal with here. You go to Gunnersville right now, and everybody might have a lipless crankbait on. Every single boat might have a lipless crankbait on. And there's certain places that there's very more than obvious baits that you have to have on your deck all the time. Rayburn, it's one of those places. But to
But
piggyback
look
off
at
what Todd's saying, you can take a Carolina rig almost anywhere in this country, minus maybe a river. And even on a river, at certain times, you can actually catch them on it. But minus like a shallow, dirty, nasty place, it is going to absolutely shine. And I mean, I remember you catching them at Cumberland calling me during practice in 19 and saying, man, I'm like crushing them on a Carolina rig right now.
look at Buddy Gross this past weekend. I mean,
Yep.
caught him doing all these things, and then when it got tough on the final day, he was like, "I picked up a Carolina rig,
Yep.
started crushing." I mean, it makes so much sense, especially this time of the year. I mean, but how many other guys were probably throwing a Carolina rig out there? Like, I think they got real technical
Yeah.
and just and didn't even just go do that. They could have been doing that the whole time.
Yeah, and I feel like the big competition to that would be like the swing head, like the big shaky heads.
Yeah,
Guys are really starting to throw those a lot, and they kind of forget sometimes that something as simple as a Carolina rig is such a fantastic water covering bait and big fish bait.
right.
So my final one is actually a specific bait, and I waited last to talk about it just because I know Todd is going to trigger Todd a little bit.
Oh
Uh,
no.
is the hybrid hunter? In my opinion, it is one of the most under the radar tournament fishing baits that you could ever see. And I'm not just trying to do that for Strike King's sake. It's for the simple fact that still guys refuse to pick it up, and not just in like any situation. It's a loud bait. It's kind of ugly. Like it runs through the water weird, but it absolutely catches big fish. Look at Ray Hanselman at um, where they just got done at Harris Chain. He just about won the event, truthfully, throwing both the Hybrid Hunter and Hybrid Hunter Junior and Sweet Shad. Wasn't it Sweet Shad? He caught him on Sweet Shad
Yeah.
and absolutely destroyed him. I mean, like I was sitting there watching Bass Live, and it was a very interesting Bass Live because they try to go to another angler, a Buddy Gross or Mullins or somebody like that, and then they'd have to come right back to Hanselman because he was the only one catching them, and he was catching so many bass, especially day 3, day 2, day 3. I mean, he was just catching so many on it. Uh, it's a bait that hasn't been thrown a lot in a lot of different places. Now, Rayburn, once again, guys kind of know about it. Uh, but you get outside of the Rayburn, Toledo area, the awareness goes way down here.
And
Guys are starting to figure it out, but it's still not there yet.
he wasn't the only one throwing it either.
No, he wasn't. I know he wasn't.
I'm just gonna say that. So he wasn't the only one throwing it because I had phone calls about from the actual guys throwing it, and they kept it pretty hidden. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
they're not Strike King guys, and they kept it hidden. And I mean, they kept it hidden pretty darn good, actually.
I sent one screenshot to you, which I thought was pretty funny. I was like, "Hey, look, this is on so and so's boat."
I
like
was
he's,
like, I already knew,
yeah. And I'm
So,
not gonna dog him or tell him, tell everybody who it was
no,
because
it's not a bad thing.
yeah,
Like,
no, it's just the fact that there was definitely, because Bass always takes pictures and all that stuff, and I just happened to catch a glimpse of it, and I know what I'm looking for with that. We've seen it so
right.
many times, so um, I noticed the color right off the bat. But yeah, no, it's definitely an under the radar bait. Guys just still, I mean, the thing, it's kind of intimidating. It's the size of a big crankbait, like a 6XD, the body is. Um, and a lot of times guys will go to the little one because it makes them feel better, like it's a confidence thing. But the whole idea behind the big hybrid hunter is you need that big body to float the bait up to be able to fish the grass. It makes it float faster, and therefore you can actually fish that submerged vegetation more effectively. But Todd, thank you, man. Thanks for coming on in here and talking to me about the 3 most under the radar baits. I'm sorry I had to talk about the hybrid hunter,
Mhm.
but I know the guys probably learned a little bit about it and a little bit about all the under the radar baits. If you haven't followed Todd on YouTube, make sure you go check it out, Todd Castledine Fishing, and you might even follow him on TikTok if you're a TikTok kind of guy, because his TikToks are kind of funny sometimes. So, Todd,
Some of
see
them.
you later, buddy.
All right. See y'all, man.